I was sitting in my car 2 blocks from my daughter's house when I read the message for the 5th time. Not because I didn't understand it, because I understood it too well, and I needed to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. The afternoon sun was cutting through the windshield the way it does in Baltimore in late October, low and sharp, the kind of light that makes everything look both beautiful and exhausted. I had my hands flat on my thighs. I was wearing my good wool coat, the charcoal gray one I'd bought for Walter's funeral 3 years ago and hadn't worn since. I don't know why I'd put it on that morning. Maybe because I'd known, somewhere deep in the place where mothers keep the truths they don't want to look at directly, that today was going to be a day that required armor. The message on my phone was from a number I didn't recognize. 8 words. Mrs. Carter, I think you should know the truth. Nothing else. No name, no follow-up. Just those 8 words sitting there like a stone dropped into still water. I looked up at my reflection in the rearview mirror. 68 years old. Brown eyes that people used to say looked like warm molasses. Walter used to say that, right up until the end. Hair gone fully silver now, cut close the way I'd always wanted to wear it, but hadn't. Not until the year after he died, when I finally stopped making small decisions based on what other people might prefer. I looked at my own face, and I thought about my daughter. And then I thought about the 8 months leading up to this moment. The contracts with my name on them. The checks I'd written. The phone calls I wasn't included in. The email address that had been changed by one single letter so that I would stop receiving updates without ever knowing why. I had spent $47,000. I had not been invited to the wedding. And now, sitting in this car in the October light, I was finally beginning to understand that those 2 facts were not a contradiction. They were the plan. Let me tell you about who I was before all of this, because you need to know me before you can understand what it cost. My name is Hannah Josephine Carter. I taught 3rd grade at Frederick Douglass Elementary School in East Baltimore for 35 years. 35 years of 8-year-olds who came in not knowing how to read and left in June reading chapter books. 35 years of parent-teacher conferences and spelling bees, and the particular specific joy of watching a child's face when a sentence finally clicks. When the letters stop being obstacles and start being doors. I retired at 63, not because I wanted to, but because my knees had given me their notice and my body had started writing checks my spirit couldn't cash. I cried on my last day. 3 of my former students, grown adults, 2 of them parents themselves, came back to stand in the back of my classroom and watch me turn off the lights for the last time. I have never been a woman with a lot, but I have never been a woman with nothing either. My husband, Walter Carter, worked for the city's Department of Public Works for 38 years. We bought our house on Edison Street in 1987 for $74,000, which felt like an impossible sum at the time. We painted it 4 times over the years. Cream, then sage green, then back to cream, then the warm yellow it is today, which Walter chose 2 years before he died, and which I will never change. We raised our daughter Dominique in that house. We took 1 family vacation a year, usually driving, never flying, because we were careful people who paid attention to what things cost. Walter died of pancreatic cancer in the spring, 20 months before any of this happened. 41 years of marriage. He was gone in 4 months from diagnosis to burial, which is the particular cruelty of that disease. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It barely gives you time to say the things that need saying. I still make 2 cups of coffee every morning. I know. But the hand does what the heart won't release. I pour his out without drinking it, and I carry mine to the back window where I can see the garden. And I have my coffee. And I think about what needs doing that day, and that is how I begin. That is the ritual that holds me together. And if you think that's sad, I would respectfully disagree. I think it's the most honest thing I do. Our daughter Dominique was 34 years old when she married Bryce Whitfield. She was the kind of beautiful that stops a room, not in a loud way, but in the way of a woman who has always known exactly how she wants to present herself to the world. Precise, composed. She wore her success the way some women wear jewelry, deliberately, and always to effect. She had a degree from Georgetown, a marketing career at a firm in Washington, D.C., an apartment in DuPont Circle that she'd furnished from scratch in under 6 weeks, and which looked like something from a magazine. I was proud of her. I want to be clear about that. I was profoundly, specifically proud of my daughter in the way that only a woman who has worked hard for every inch of her own life can be proud of watching her child move through the world with such apparent ease. The ease I had not had, The ease I had in some quiet way spent my whole working life trying to give her. She met Bryce at a conference in Chicago 2.5 years before the wedding. He was a corporate attorney at Morrison & Webb, one of D.C.'s prominent firms. He was tall, handsome in the way of a man who has always been taken seriously, and he came from what Dominique described with obvious satisfaction as old Virginia money. The Whitfield family had a home in McLean worth somewhere north of $2 million. His mother, Carolyn, was involved in several charitable boards. His father, James, had been a retired investment banker. When Dominique brought Bryce to Baltimore for the first time, I made pot roast and cornbread and sweet potato pie. Walter had been gone for 8 months by then, and the house felt large in the way that houses feel large when they're missing one of their main inhabitants. Bryce was polite. He complimented the food. He asked Walter's mother, my mother-in-law, 81 years old and sharp as a tack, about her garden, which she liked. He did everything correctly. He did not ask me a single question about myself. Not one. I noted this. I filed it away in the part of me that has spent 35 years reading children. Reading the child who is performing confidence, the child who is afraid, the child who has learned to say the right things without meaning any of them. I noticed and I said nothing because Dominique was happy, and a mother who loves her daughter does not lead with her reservations. That is what I told myself. The engagement was announced in January. Dominique called me, vibrating with excitement, and for 20 minutes she was the girl she used to be, breathless and warm and mine. I sat at the kitchen table in the yellow house on Edison Street, and I felt Walter's absence like a physical weight, and also a kind of gratitude that I could feel happiness alongside the grief, which I'd been told was possible but hadn't fully believed until that moment. "Mom, his family has a venue in mind," she said. "Belmont Estate in Virginia. It's—" She paused, and I could hear her smiling. "It's really beautiful." "How much?" I asked, because I am a practical woman. A beat. $28,000 for the venue alone. But Mom, listen. Dom. Mom, you know Bryce's family has certain expectations. The Whitfields, this is the world he comes in from. This is how things are done. I looked at Walter's empty chair. "We'll figure it out," I said. And that was all it took. That was the open door. Over the next 14 months, I paid for everything. The venue, $28,000, signed in my name. The florist, Bloom and Petal Events out of Richmond, $6,400. The caterer, $8,200. The photographer, a boutique firm that Dominique had found, whose work she showed me on her laptop with the reverence most people reserve for fine art, $4,800. The jazz quartet for the ceremony and the band for the reception, $3,200. The wedding planner, a woman named Claire, who communicated exclusively by email and never once called me by my first name, $2,400. Miscellaneous, alterations, invitations, the cake, the rehearsal dinner deposit, roughly $3,900 more, $47,200. I want you to sit with that number. I want you to understand what it represents for a retired public school teacher whose husband left behind a modest life insurance policy and a pension that covers the mortgage and not a great deal else. That number came from the account Walter and I had built over 4 decades of careful living, from the money we had specifically saved. For the children, Walter used to say, though we only ever had one. For moments exactly like this. I signed every contract. My name was on every agreement. Every vendor had my phone number as the primary contact, and with each passing month I was consulted less. "Mom, we've decided to go with a different cake vendor. Can you just send the deposit directly to Claire? It'll be easier." "Mom, the venue needs the final head count by Friday." "I'll handle it. You don't need to call them." "Mom, we moved the venue walkthrough to a Tuesday. I know you work. I know you have things. It's fine. We'll handle it." I work. I knew things. I have things. I let it go. Each time, I let it go. I told myself she was overwhelmed. I told myself this is what wedding planning does to people. I told myself that the most loving thing a mother can do is hold the space without filling it with her own needs. I told myself a great many things that, in retrospect, were simply the stories I needed to believe in order to keep giving. There was the time I asked to see the table centerpiece mock-ups. "Mom, don't stress me. I just want to enjoy this." There was the time I called the venue directly to confirm the seating arrangement, and the coordinator, a young woman named Amber, asked me, And you are you the mother of the bride or the contract holder? She sounded confused. I told her both. There was a brief pause that I chose not to examine. There was the email, and I only found this later after everything, where Dominique had CC'd me on a thread with the florist. Except the email address was wrong by one letter, Hanab instead of Hannah, a single transposed character. I never received any of the floral updates. I assumed Dominique was handling it. I assumed. There was the text message 3 weeks before the wedding. Mom, come at 9 a.m. the morning of, don't bring anyone. I had mentioned to my best friend Dorothy, Dot, as I've called her since we were 22 years old and working the same summer at the rec center, that she might ride up to Belmont with me, that I might want a familiar face. When I got that text, I called Dot and said, I think Dom wants it to be just us. I'll call you after. Dot said, okay, baby. Call me if you need me. I should have kept her in the car. I want to tell you about the night before the wedding. I drove up to Virginia that Friday afternoon and checked into the hotel in Warrenton, 12 minutes from Belmont Estate. I had a room with a view of a parking lot and a breakfast bar that opened at 6 a.m. I ordered room service, soup and a grilled cheese sandwich, and I ate it at the desk because the table was too large to eat at alone. After I ate, I opened the box. I had carried it all the way from Baltimore in my good leather tote bag, wrapped in tissue paper inside a velvet pouch. Walter's mother's pearl necklace. 3 strands of freshwater pearls with a gold and garnet clasp, made in 1962, worn by Mama Louise at her wedding, worn by me at mine in 1982, and kept in a cedar box in my bedroom closet ever since. I had spent 2 evenings restringing it with a jeweler on Charles Street, the good one that's been there since before Dominique was born. I had cleaned every pearl by hand with a damp cloth and mild soap, the way the jeweler showed me. I set it on the desk beside my soup bowl and looked at it. I thought about calling Dominique, just to hear her voice, just to tell her I loved her and I was proud of her, and that her father would have been there if any force in the universe could have arranged it. I picked up my phone, put it back down. She'd seemed distracted the last few times we'd spoken. Busy, present in the functional sense, answering questions, confirming logistics, but not there, not the way she used to be there. I told myself it was pre-wedding nerves. I told myself it was normal. I called Dot instead. You okay? She asked. I'm good. Tired. A little sad. You know how it is. Walter. We were quiet for a moment in the way that old friends can be quiet. He'd be so proud, Dot said. I know. And so annoyed at this drive. You know how he hated Virginia. I laughed. I actually laughed alone in that hotel room, because it was completely true. Walter had deeply personal objections to the state of Virginia that he had never been able to fully articulate. We laughed, and I felt better, and I went to sleep with the pearl necklace on the nightstand and the curtains not quite closed so the morning light would wake me naturally. The morning of the wedding, I wore my ivory linen dress, the one I'd had made by Mrs. Patterson on Greenmount Avenue, the woman who'd been sewing for our church for 40 years. I had described the wedding colors to her, cream and soft gold, and she had matched the fabric so precisely that when I put the dress on, I felt for just a moment like I was part of something. I wore the pearl necklace. Not to give it to Dominique yet. That would be a moment in the bridal suite, private, between mother and daughter. But because I wanted to carry it on my body into that space. Foolish, maybe, but I am an emotional woman in the ways that matter. I arrived at Belmont Estate at 9:02 a.m. The grounds were already being transformed. Workers were adjusting the floral arch near the ceremony garden. Cream roses and pale gold dahlias, just as specified. The string quartet was doing a sound check somewhere out of sight, scales drifting through the morning air. The caterer's van was parked near the side entrance, and the smell of something warm and savory was beginning to work its way across the grounds. It was beautiful. I want to say that clearly. Before everything that followed, it was genuinely, achingly beautiful. And I had helped make it so. A young woman with a clipboard found me near the entrance. Mrs. Carter? Dominique's mother? That's me. She asked me to bring you to the bridal suite, right this way. I followed her through the garden, past the rows of white and gold chairs being set for the ceremony, past the cocktail tables being draped with linens. I noticed a guest book table near the entrance, a detail I hadn't selected, a detail I hadn't been told about. A small thing. I noted it and let it go. The bridal suite was in the estate's east wing, The door had a handwritten sign, "The Bride." The young woman knocked. "Dominique, your mother is here." A pause. Then the door opened. My daughter was in her wedding gown, not the gown we had chosen together, the clean-lined A-line with the simple cathedral train that she had cried over at the salon that I had put a deposit on 6 months ago. This was different, more elaborate, beaded across the bodice in an intricate pattern that caught the light, more expensive, more them, meaning more of what the Whitfields' world looked like, and less of what my daughter had been when she was choosing for herself. But she was beautiful. I want to say that too. Whatever else happened, she was breathtakingly beautiful, and she was my daughter. And for one unguarded second, my heart was so full I forgot everything I'd been quietly worried about. Then I saw her face. There was no warmth there, not nervousness, not the teary emotionality of a bride who needs her mother. What I saw was something I had seen in her face a handful of times over the past few years, and always chose to explain away. A kind of professional calculation, an assessment. She was weighing something. Behind her, I could see her bridesmaids, 4 young women in dusty gold, watching with the particular expression of people who know something you don't. "Mom," Dominique said. Her voice was even. "You're right on time." She stepped into the hallway, pulled the door mostly closed behind her. Just the 2 of us. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "About today." "Okay," I said. My hands were holding the velvet pouch with the pearl necklace. I noticed they had gone very still. Bryce and I made a decision. She said it like a business announcement, like the opening of a meeting. We want today to be about our families joining together, and there are certain expectations from his side, about the guest list, about the tone of the event. I waited. "You're not on the guest list, Mom, for the ceremony or the reception. This is our day, and we need it to look a certain way. I think it's better if you head home." The sun was coming through the window at the end of the hallway. I remember seeing it fall in a long stripe across the floor. I remember the sound of the string quartet warming up somewhere outside, playing something I didn't recognize. I remember the smell of the flowers. I stood very still, and I looked at my daughter's face, and I understood 3 things simultaneously. First, she had rehearsed this. Second, she did not expect me to argue. Third, somewhere behind that composed expression was a woman who could not quite make herself meet her mother's eyes. "Dom," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "I signed every contract in this building. I know, and I'm grateful. I paid for everything you're standing in the middle of." "Mom!" The first edge of impatience. "Don't make this about money. I'm not making it about anything. I'm telling you a fact." A door opened down this hall. Bryce appeared in a morning suit, charcoal, perfectly fitted, a single cream rose in his lapel. He took in the scene with the efficiency of a man who had been briefed on it in advance. "Is everything okay?" he asked. He was looking at Dominique, not at me. "Fine," she said. "Mom was just leaving." He nodded. His eyes moved to me for exactly 1 second, a measuring glance, the kind you give something that needs to be contained. And then he turned to his wife. "Ceremony's in 40 minutes, he said. "Your mother is here. The Hendersons just arrived." "I'll be right there." He went back inside. The door closed. Dominique looked at me. For just a moment, 1 moment, no more, I saw something move across her face. Something that might have been grief or shame, or the memory of who she used to be when she was 7 years old and made me paper butterflies for Mother's Day. Then it was gone. "The coordinator can show you to a side exit," she said, "so you won't have to go back through the main garden." I looked down at the velvet pouch in my hands. Then I set it on the hallway table. "Keep it," I said. "Or don't. That's yours to decide." And I walked myself out. Not through the side exit. Through the main garden, past the floral arch I had paid for, past the caterers I had contracted, past the chairs I had selected from a vendor catalog on my kitchen table on a Tuesday night in March. I walked through all of it with my head level and my hands loose at my sides. And I did not cry. And I did not run. And I did not look back. I got in my car. I sat there for 4 minutes without moving. Then I called Dorothy Freeman. "Dot," I said. "I need you." I was about to start the car when someone knocked on my window. I looked up. It was the young woman from the clipboard. Amber, I would later learn her name was. She was maybe 25, and she looked like someone who had made a decision they were going to have to live with, regardless of the outcome. I rolled down the window. She glanced back toward the estate, then leaned in slightly. "Mrs. Carter, I don't know if I should be telling you this, but I think you should know." She took a breath. "Someone called our office last week, tried to transfer the primary contract holder on all of your agreements to a different name, said there'd been a family decision. Our manager said we couldn't do it without written authorization from the original signer, that's you, and proper documentation." I looked at her. "Whose name were they trying to put on the contracts?" Amber pressed her lips together. "I can't say. I probably shouldn't have said this much. You seemed like a really nice person, and I thought—" She stopped. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. I really am." She walked quickly back toward the estate before I could say another word. I sat in my car. I looked at my own hands on the steering wheel. Someone had tried to remove my name from the contracts. Not after I arrived. Not in response to my reaction. Before, last week. While I was in Baltimore, pressing my ivory dress and restringing the pearl necklace, someone had already begun the work of making me disappear from an event I had built from nothing. I had been removed as a guest. They had also tried to remove me as the person with legal standing. The only reason I still had any power in this situation was that a 25-year-old woman named Amber had followed the rules. I called Dot. "Where are you?" she said immediately. "Parking lot." "I'm coming." "No, I need you to find Wi-Fi near the venue. I'll meet you there." "Hannah." "Dot, I need to make some phone calls, and I need to not be alone when I make them." A beat. "There's a diner on Route 29. I'll send you the pin." I started the car, and as I pulled out of the Belmont Estate parking lot, past the beautiful gates, past the valet attendants who watched me go with the politely averted eyes of people who had been told I was leaving, I felt something shift inside me. Not grief, not rage. Something much colder and much more useful. They thought removing me from the guest list was enough. They didn't understand that my name was on everything. The diner on Route 29 was the kind of place that has existed in every small Virginia town since 1954 and will probably outlast everything else on that road. Checkered floor. Coffee that came in a white ceramic mug without you asking. A pie case by the register with 3 kinds rotating daily. Dot was already there when I pulled in. She was sitting in a corner booth, her coat still on, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, watching the door. When she saw me walk in, she didn't say anything. She just looked at my face and pushed the second mug she'd already ordered across the table toward me. That is the thing about a friend of 46 years. She had already ordered the coffee. I sat down. "Tell me," she said. So I did. All of it. The hallway. Dominique's face. Bryce appearing on cue like a man who had rehearsed his entrance. The side exit I was meant to leave through so I wouldn't disturb the guests. And then Amber, and the window, and what she'd told me about someone trying to transfer the contracts. Dot listened without interrupting. This is one of her greatest gifts. She is a woman who understands that some stories need to be told all the way through before anyone should speak. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your name is still on the contracts." "Every single one." She nodded slowly. "Then you still have a say in what happens at this wedding." "That's what I'm thinking." Another silence. Dot turned her mug in a slow circle on the table. "Hannah, before you do anything, are you sure?" I looked out the window. Down the road, maybe 4 miles, Belmont Estate was filling up with guests right now. The jazz quartet was playing something soft and elegant. The cream roses and gold dahlias were perfectly arranged. The caterers were setting out the first course. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. With my money, with my name, without me. "The question isn't whether I'm sure," I said. "The question is whether I can live with myself if I don't." Dot picked up her phone and set it on the table between us. "Then let's get to work." We divided the list. Dot took the florist and the caterer. I took the venue, the photographer, and the band. I want to tell you how those calls went, because I think people imagine that a woman in this situation would be crying, or shouting, or barely holding herself together. I was none of those things. I was a 3rd-grade teacher for 35 years. I have delivered difficult news to parents who did not want to hear it. I have sat across tables from people who were angry or in denial or trying to talk me out of what I knew to be true. I know how to be the calmest person in a difficult conversation. I called the venue first, asked for the events manager, Got a man named David who had the careful voice of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. Mr. David, I said, my name is Hannah Carter. I am the primary contract holder for the Whitfield Carter wedding currently taking place at your facility. I have my contract number if you need it. A pause. Mrs. Carter. Yes. How can I help you? I need to discuss the status of services. I understand there was an attempt last week to transfer my contract to another party. A longer pause. Yes, there was an inquiry. We were not able to process it due to lack of proper authorization. I'm aware. I'm calling because I want to confirm that as the contract holder, any decision about the continuation of services is mine to make. That is correct, Mrs. Carter. Then I need to let you know that I'm reviewing my options. I'll be in touch within the hour. I hung up. Across the table, Dot was speaking quietly but clearly into her phone. Yes, this is Dorothy Freeman calling on behalf of Hannah Carter, the contract holder for an event currently in progress at Belmont Estate in Warrenton. I need to speak with someone about an immediate service review. I called the photographer. The photographer's assistant answered. Young, slightly flustered when I explained who I was. I gave him the contract number. He put me on hold. His manager came on, a woman with a brisk professional tone that softened slightly when I explained the situation. Not all of it, just the facts. I'm the contract holder. My name is on the agreement. I'm requesting a service suspension pending a review of the contractual terms. Mrs. Carter, I want to make sure I understand. You want us to pause the shoot? I want you to understand your legal obligation is to me, not to any other party at that event. A breath. I understand. We'll wait for your confirmation before proceeding. The band coordinator was harder. He had an opinion about it. Ma'am, we're set up and ready to play. The event is in an hour and a half. Do you understand the disruption? Sir, my name is on your contract. My check cleared your account. I am politely informing you of the situation. What you do with that information is up to you, but I'd suggest having your lawyer look at the liability terms before you decide to ignore the contract holder's instructions. Silence. Then, we'll stand by for confirmation. I set my phone down. Dot looked at me across the diner table. Her florist and caterer calls were done. It's done, she said. I nodded. Outside, a pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. A man got out with a paper bag. The ordinary world going about its ordinary business. Inside, 4 miles down the road, a wedding was beginning to come apart at the seams. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. I need you to understand something about that hour in the diner. People will hear this story and say I was cruel. They will say I was vindictive, that I let anger drive me to ruin my own daughter's wedding. They will say a mother who loves her child would never do such a thing. I want to ask those people a question. At what point does love become permission? At what point does a mother's willingness to absorb pain, to smooth it over, to explain it away, to choose peace over truth, stop being love and start being something that harms everyone, including herself? I had given Dominique everything I had, not just money, though the money was real and it was significant. I had given her my time, my attention, my emotional energy, my willingness to be secondary in every plan she made, my silence when her behavior hurt me, my excuses on her behalf when other people noticed what I was too close to see. I had given her $47,000 to build a day that she then looked me in the face and told me I was not allowed to attend. The phone calls were not revenge. They were the first honest thing I had done in 14 months. Dominique's texts started arriving at 11:47. Mom, the caterers are saying there's a problem with the order. What's happening? At noon. Mom, why is the photographer saying he's on hold? What is going on? At 12:14. Mom, pick up your phone. At 12:22, Bryce called. I watched his name appear on my screen. I set the phone face down on the table. At 12:31, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It was Carolyn Whitfield, her voice tight with controlled fury, saying there had been a serious misunderstanding, and she needed to speak with me as soon as possible. I thought about Carolyn Whitfield, the way she had looked at me at that Georgetown dinner, appraising, distant, deciding. The way she had never asked me a single question about myself. Not one. I did not call her back. At 12:49, Dominique again. Did you do this? Did you actually do this? I typed one sentence. You told me I wasn't invited. So I left, and I took my contracts with me. I put the phone back down. Dot reached across the table and put her hand over mine. We sat there together, two women in their 60s in a diner on Route 29, while 4 miles away a wedding fell apart the way things fall apart when they were built on a foundation someone else paid for. We drove back to Baltimore in the late afternoon, Dot following me in her car so neither of us would be alone on the road. The sky had gone the particular shade of October gray that settles in around 4 o'clock in Virginia. Heavy and low, the color of something thinking about rain. I kept the radio off. I didn't want music. I didn't want voices. I wanted the sound of the road and my own breathing and the time to be alone inside my own head without having to manage anyone else's feelings about what I was experiencing. I thought about Walter. I thought about the year he was diagnosed, how Dominique had come home. She was 31, already deep into her DC life, but she had come home and sat at the kitchen table and cried, and I had held her. I had held her the way I held her when she was 7 and scraped her knees and 8, and had her heart broken by a best friend in 15, and felt as 15-year-olds do, that the entire world was arranged specifically to humiliate her. I had held her through all of it. And then Walter had gotten sicker, and the visits had gotten shorter, and the calls had gotten briefer, and there had been a period of about 4 months. The worst 4 months. The months when I was sleeping in a chair beside his hospital bed and learning how to talk to hospice nurses, during which Dominique had called me twice a week, dutifully, for 15 minutes each time, and I had understood, I had told myself I understood, that people handle grief differently, that she was processing, that she needed to protect herself. But I had been alone. I had been almost entirely alone. And I had added that to the list of things I understood and forgave and did not examine too closely because she was my daughter and I loved her. I was beginning to understand, somewhere on that drive through the Virginia countryside, that love is not the same as unlimited tolerance. That forgiveness given without examination is not grace. It is simply a way of making yourself smaller so that someone else doesn't have to confront the size of what they've taken. I had made myself very small for a very long time. I was done with small. When I got home to the yellow house on Edison Street, I sat in the kitchen for a while without turning on the lights. Then I got up, turned on every light in the room, made myself a proper dinner, salmon, roasted sweet potatoes, green beans with garlic, and ate it at the table where Walter and I had eaten 30 years of meals. Then I took out the box. I keep a shoebox in the hall closet that I've labeled in my own handwriting wedding documents. Inside it, every contract, every invoice, every email thread I'd printed out, every receipt. 14 months of paper. I sat at the kitchen table and I read through all of it. Every page. The second time through, I wasn't reading for logistics. I was reading for the story underneath the story. The way the language in Dominique's emails shifted over the months from Mom, do you think, to Mom, just to Mom. The way my name appeared in the vendor correspondence only as a billing entity. The way every decision had been made and then communicated to me after the fact, wrapped in language that made consultation sound like notification. We've decided, we've chosen, we're going with. Never. What do you think? Never. Would you like to see? Never. Mom, we need your input. I found the email with the wrong address. I had never noticed it before. Why would I? I had simply assumed that floral updates were being handled. One letter, Henab instead of Hannah. That single transposition that had ensured I received none of the planning updates after August. I stared at it for a long time. This was not a typo. I have been an educator for 35 years. I understand the difference between a mistake and a strategy. A typo gets corrected when the bounce back comes. A deliberate misdirection does not. My phone buzzed. Renee. My younger sister Renee Carter Simmons, 61 years old, who taught nursing at Morgan State and had the most direct gaze of any human being I had ever met. We talked every Sunday. We had talked every Sunday since our mother died in 2009. She was, after Dot, the person who knew me best. Hannah, she said when I picked up. No preamble. I heard. Word travels. LaToya saw it on Dominique's Instagram. The wedding photos stopped mid-ceremony. The comments are... She paused. Never mind the comments. Are you okay? I'm okay. Are you actually okay, or are you doing the thing where you say you're okay because it's simpler? I almost smiled. The second one, but also actually approaching the first one. Hannah? Her voice shifted. Careful now. The voice she used when she had something difficult to say. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 2 months ago, and I didn't. and I'm sorry. I waited. Dominique called me in August. She asked if I thought I could talk you out of coming to the wedding. Said you would make things difficult. Said Bryce's, family had certain expectations, and your presence would create the wrong impression. The kitchen was very quiet. She called you, I said. She called me. And you didn't tell me. Hannah, Renee exhaled. I thought I'd misunderstood. I thought there was no way she actually meant it the way it sounded. And then I hoped I was wrong. And then the wedding got closer, and I kept telling myself it was going to be fine, that she was just stressed, that... Renee. I know, I should have told you. I'm sorry. I sat with that for a moment. My sister, who loved me, who had known and had stayed silent because sometimes knowing is frightening and silence is easier than the thing that comes after. I understand, I said. And I did. I understood it because I had done the same thing to myself, over and over for years. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to figure out the truth, I said. All of it. 3 days after the wedding, I drove to the post office. I want to be clear that this was not a dramatic decision. I needed stamps. The ordinary world insists on continuing even when your life has just reorganized itself around a new and difficult truth. I needed stamps, and I needed to mail a birthday card to my cousin in Georgia, and so I went to the post office on a Thursday morning. That's where I ran into Gerald Patterson. Gerald was a man I'd known peripherally for years. He worked somewhere in the D.C. legal world, had come to one of our church fundraisers a few years back, moved in some of the same professional circles as people I knew. A decent man, slightly nervous in the way of people who are always worried about saying the wrong thing. He was standing in line ahead of me, and when he turned around and saw me, something happened to his face. He looked relieved, and then immediately guilty about the relief. Hannah, he said, I wasn't sure if you'd been at the wedding or not. I wasn't, I said, watching him carefully. Why? He shifted his weight. Bryce mentioned you might not be there, said there'd been some concerns about your health. He stopped. I'm sorry. I'm saying this wrong. What specifically did he say about my health, Gerald? He looked genuinely uncomfortable. He said you'd been having some difficulties, mental health difficulties, that the family had decided it would be better for everyone if you didn't. He stopped again, pressing his lips together. Hannah, I have to be honest with you. I'm hearing this story from you, and it sounds completely different from what I heard from him. Mental health difficulties. I held that phrase in my mind and turned it over carefully. He had not simply excluded me. He had built a story before excluding me. A story to explain away any objection I might raise. A story to make me dismissible before I even opened my mouth. Gerald, I said, I'm not having mental health difficulties. I'm having a perfectly rational response to being excluded from a wedding I paid $47,000 for. His mouth fell open slightly. You paid every vendor, every contract, in my name. He stared at me for a long moment. Oh, he said quietly. Oh, Hannah, I'm so sorry. I bought my stamps. I mailed my card to my cousin in Georgia. I drove home and I called Sandra Okafor. Sandra Okafor had been practicing family and contract law in Baltimore for 22 years. Dot had known her since law school and had given me her number 6 months ago, saying, just keep it, you never know. Dot had always been wiser than she lets on. Sandra reviewed my contracts at her office on a Tuesday afternoon. She was a small, precise woman with reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose and the demeanor of someone who has heard everything and is still capable of being interested. All of these are in your name, she said, setting the last folder down. Yes. Primary signatory, primary contact, primary financial responsible party. Yes. And you had no input into the guest list. I wasn't shown a guest list. She made a note. Now, you mentioned someone attempted to transfer these contracts to another name prior to the event. The venue coordinator told me, last week, before the wedding. Do you know whose name they tried to put on the contracts? I shook my head. She wouldn't tell me. Sandra looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. I can find out, with your permission. A pause. Mrs. Carter, there's something else. While I was reviewing your materials, I ran a routine check on the parties involved. She set her pen down. Bryce Whitfield is no longer employed at Morrison & Webb. I went still. How long? His separation was processed 11 months ago. There was an internal investigation related to client account irregularities. No criminal charges have been filed, but the matter is still under review. 11 months. The entire engagement. The entire wedding planning period. Every conversation in which Dominique had mentioned his career, his upcoming cases, the promotion he was expecting. All of it. 11 months of a story that was not true. And the contract transfer, I said. Whose name? Sandra looked at her notes. Carolyn Whitfield. His mother. Not Dominique, not Bryce. His mother. I sat in Sandra Okafor's office on a Tuesday afternoon, and I rearranged everything I thought I understood about what had happened and why. Because if Carolyn Whitfield had been the one trying to transfer those contracts, trying to give herself legal standing over a wedding she hadn't paid for, then this was not simply a story about my daughter making a thoughtless, hurtful decision. This was a story about a family that had been planning this for a very long time. Sandra called me 2 days later, a Thursday morning when I was in the garden trimming back the rose bushes. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "I have more information." I set down my clippers. She had found, through sources she declined to specify in detail, that the Whitfield family's financial picture was considerably different from what had been presented. The McLean property, the $2 million home Dominique had described as the family estate, had been refinanced 3 times in 5 years. There had been a notice of default 8 months ago, quietly resolved. James Whitfield, the retired investment banker, had retired involuntarily following a firm restructuring in 2019 and had not been financially active since. And Bryce Whitfield, who had lost his position at Morrison & Webb 11 months ago over client account irregularities, had been actively managing the image of a life he could no longer afford. The suits, the golf outings, the watch that appeared on his Instagram 3 months after he lost his job. The $47,000, Sandra said carefully, represents, to the best of my research, a significant portion of what made this wedding financially possible at all. I stood in my garden in the October cold and looked at the rose bushes I was trimming. They needed the wedding to look perfect, I said. They needed the venue and the flowers and the photographer. They needed the image. It appears so. And they needed me to pay for it. Yes. But they didn't want me there. No. I was quiet for a moment. Sandra, why wouldn't they want me there? If I'm the one paying for everything, why go to all the trouble of excluding me? A pause. I've thought about that, she said. The guest list for the ceremony and reception, from what I've gathered, was composed almost entirely of Bryce's professional contacts, former colleagues, people from the D.C. social circuit that the Whitfields have been trying to maintain presence in, people who knew the family when things looked different. She chose her next words carefully. I think the concern was about optics, about the image of who was paying for things, about having a retired black schoolteacher from Baltimore at the table. Silence. I can't speak to their motivations with certainty. I can, I said. I thanked her. I hung up. I stood in the garden for a long time. Then I called Dominique. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she had been waiting. Mom. Her voice was guarded in a way I recognized. The voice of a woman who is prepared for a difficult conversation and is hoping to control the terms of it. Dom, I said. I'm going to ask you one question. I need you to tell me the truth. A breath. Okay. Did you know Bryce lost his job? The silence that followed was 11 months long. It stretched between us over the phone line, across the 100 miles between Baltimore and D.C., across every conversation we'd had since last December in which she had mentioned his work, his career, his future. Then she said quietly, He told me not to worry about it. That's not what I asked. Another pause. Smaller this time. Yes. I knew. I sat down on the garden bench Walter had built for me in 2003 from cedar planks he'd gotten from a salvage yard. I had sat on this bench through 20 years of seasons. You knew, I said. For how long? Since March. March, 7 months before the wedding. 7 months during which I had written checks, signed contracts, called vendors, and been systematically excluded from every decision. Dom, Mom, Bryce said he had prospects. He said it was temporary. He said if we could just get through the wedding, get the photos, establish ourselves in the right circles, he'd have the connections to land something better. His family has contacts. That's how this world works. And you believed him. He's my husband. He's the man you chose to protect, I said, by helping to exclude the woman who was paying for everything. Mom, I never wanted. Her voice cracked just slightly, then steadied. It wasn't supposed to go the way it went. Carolyn said it would be cleaner if you weren't there. Said the optics of. She said the guests wouldn't understand the dynamic of a black woman from Baltimore who taught school for 35 years. That's not. Dominique, don't. Silence. Did you know Carolyn tried to transfer the contracts to her name? A very different silence. Shorter, sharper. What? Someone called the venue the week before your wedding and tried to put the contracts in Carolyn's name, so that I would have no legal standing over the event I paid for. Mom, I didn't know that. Her voice had changed. Something genuine in it now. Actual shock. I didn't know she did that. But you knew enough. Yes, barely a whisper. I knew enough. I looked at Walter's bench, at the garden he had planted and I had kept, at the yellow house that had been our whole life. I'm going to tell you something, I said, and I need you to hear it without defending yourself. She was quiet. You knew the truth. You chose to protect your husband and his family's image, and in doing so, you stood in a hallway and told me to leave through a side exit so I wouldn't disturb the guests. At a wedding I built. From nothing. With your father's retirement money. The sound she made was not quite crying and not quite speaking. Something raw and unformed. I know, she said. Mom, I know. I'm not asking for an apology right now, I said. An apology right now would be too easy for both of us. I'm telling you that I know what happened. I know who knew what, and I know what I'm going to do about it. What are you going to do? I'm going to take care of myself, I said. Probably for the first time in a very long time. I ended the call. I sat on Walter's bench until the cold became too much. Then I went inside and called Sandra Okafor again. The thing nobody tells you about finally seeing the truth is that it doesn't feel the way you expect. You expect relief, maybe, or clarity, or the righteous satisfaction of a woman who has been wronged and now knows the full shape of the wrong. And some of those things were there, somewhere in the mix. But mostly what I felt in the days after that phone call with Dominique was a profound and disorienting exhaustion, the kind that comes not from doing too much, but from having held something heavy for too long and finally setting it down. My arms didn't know what to do without the weight. I spent the first 3 days not answering the phone, not to punish anyone, not as strategy, simply because I needed to be alone inside my own head without managing anyone else's reaction to what I was feeling. The calls came anyway. Dominique, twice a day, Bryce, once, then not again. Carolyn Whitfield, 3 times, leaving messages I did not listen to in full before deleting. On the 4th day, I called Dr. Yvette Holloway. Yvette had been recommended by a woman in my church who had gone through her own family unraveling 2 years prior. A situation different in its specifics, but similar in its essential shape. I had kept Yvette's number in my phone for 4 months, in the way you keep an umbrella in your car through a long dry season. Just in case. The just in case had arrived. Her office was on North Charles Street, on the 2nd floor of a brownstone with good light and bookshelves that went floor to ceiling. She was a tall woman in her mid-50s with natural hair going silver at the temples and the quality, which I recognized and respected, of someone who listened not just to your words but to the space between them. Tell me what brings you in today, she said, after the paperwork was done and we had gotten our coffee. I had prepared several versions of the answer on the drive over. Organized, chronological, clear. I was going to tell her about the wedding, the contracts, the phone calls. Give her the facts first and the feelings later, the way I'd always done things. What came out instead was, I've spent 32 years being someone's mother, and somewhere in there I forgot how to be a person. She didn't look surprised. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for exactly that sentence. Tell me about that, she said. I talked for most of that first hour. I talked about Walter and how his illness had rearranged everything. How the grief of watching him die had in some ways been easier to manage than the loneliness afterward. Because grief had a shape, grief had a name, and loneliness just sat there in the kitchen with you at 6 a.m. when you poured the second cup of coffee. I talked about Dominique. Not the wedding, not the betrayal, but the years before. The way the distance had crept in so gradually, I'd convinced myself it wasn't distance at all, just the natural evolution of an adult child's life. The way I had learned to be grateful for 15-minute phone calls and rare visits, and a daughter who answered texts promptly when she needed something. I talked about the email address with the wrong letter, about the contracts, about standing in that hallway with the pearl necklace in my hands. And then I talked about the thing I hadn't let myself look at directly yet. I've been questioning myself, I said. Whether I imagined things, whether I was too sensitive, whether the pattern I'm seeing was really there, or whether I constructed it after the fact to make sense of something that hurt me. Yvette was quiet for a moment. How long have you been questioning yourself? Years, I said. Probably years. And now that you have the documents, the contracts, the evidence, the email address changed by one letter, the attempted contract transfer, the timeline of Bryce's job loss against Dominique's story, does it feel different? I looked at my hands in my lap. It feels like being told you're not crazy, I said, and then feeling strange about needing to be told. Why strange? Because I should have known. A woman my age, my experience, I should have seen it. Hannah, her voice was even, steady. You saw it. You noted every one of those things when it happened. You filed it away. You chose, for reasons that were rooted in love, not weakness, to give the benefit of the doubt each time. That sounds like an excuse. It sounds like a mother, she said. The problem wasn't that you couldn't see. The problem was that you'd spent so many years putting other people's comfort above your own perception that you'd trained yourself to discount what you knew. I sat with that. There's something else, I said. Go ahead. I feel relieved. I said it quietly, like a confession. Not happy. I'm not happy about any of this. But underneath everything, there's this relief. Like I've been waiting for permission to trust myself, and now I have it. And I feel guilty for feeling relieved. Yvette leaned forward slightly. Why guilty? Because my daughter's marriage is falling apart. Because I spent $47,000 on a disaster. Because I canceled a wedding and I don't know what that cost those vendors or those guests or... Hannah, I stopped. You have spent 32 years absorbing guilt that did not belong to you, she said. That guilt became so familiar that you started feeling it automatically, even when the situation didn't warrant it. The relief you're feeling right now is not callousness. It's what happens when a woman who has been told, over and over, in small ways and large, that her perception cannot be trusted, finally has proof that she was right. The room was very quiet. I was right, I said. Not a question, not a performance, just a sentence I had needed to say out loud. Yes, Yvette said simply. You were. I cried then, for the first time since the morning of the wedding. Not the sharp, breathless crying of devastation, but the slow, deep release of someone setting down a weight they have carried so long it had begun to feel like part of their body. I cried for about 4 minutes. Then I dried my face, drank my coffee, and we got to work. My sister came to the house the following Sunday, as she always did, but this time she came an hour early and she brought pralines from the bakery on Reisterstown Road that we had been going to since our mother was alive. She had a bruise under her eye from where she had, she explained, walked into an open cabinet door at 5 in the morning, and she was wearing the oversized Howard sweatshirt she'd had since 1989. And she was my sister, the person who had known me the longest of anyone still living. We sat at the kitchen table and she said, I owe you more than an apology. You don't owe me, Hannah, let me say this. I folded my hands and let her say it. I have watched you give and give and give to that girl for 30 years, Renee said. And every time you'd mention that something felt off, that Dominique hadn't called, that she'd been short with you, that you felt like you were being managed rather than loved, I'd say you were being too sensitive, that she was busy, that you needed to let her live her life. She looked at me steadily. I said those things because they were easier than the truth. And the truth was that something was wrong, and I didn't want to be the one to name it. You weren't wrong that she needed to live her life, I said. No, but there's a difference between living her life and using yours. We were quiet for a moment. Walter used to say that, I said. Not about Dominique specifically, but he'd say, there are people who give and people who take, and the dangerous ones are the people who take while making you feel like you're the one receiving. Renee nodded slowly. He was a wise man. He was. He saw Dominique more clearly than I did sometimes. I think I knew it. I picked up my praline, turned it over in my hand. When you're the mother, you're too close. Every fault is a reflection of something you did or didn't do. Every cruelty is something you must have taught. That's not true. I know, but it takes a while to unknow. We ate our pralines. We talked about other things. Renee's nursing students, my garden, a cousin's new baby in Georgia. The ordinary texture of a life that continues even when the extraordinary has disrupted it. Before she left, Renee stopped in the doorway and turned back to me. Whatever happens with Dominique, she said, you are not less. You are not the problem. You are a woman who loved her child well and got taken advantage of for it. And that is not a character flaw. That is the cost of being someone who means what she says. I stood in my kitchen doorway and watched my sister walk to her car, and I thought, this is what it costs to finally be seen. Not by the person you most wanted to see you, but by the people who were always standing close enough to look. It was a Thursday morning, 12 days after the wedding, and I was in the garden when my phone rang with Carolyn Whitfield's number. I almost didn't answer. I had thought about what I would say to Carolyn Whitfield when this moment came, and I had known it was coming, the same way you know rain is coming when the air changes pressure, for several days. I had thought about anger, and I had thought about silence, and I had thought about the particular precision of telling someone exactly what you know and watching them understand they have been found out. In the end, I answered because I was curious. Hannah, she said. Her voice was warm, softer than I remembered from the wedding planning calls, when she had been professionally cordial at best. I'm so glad you picked up. I've been thinking about you. Carolyn, I want you to know, what happened at the wedding was never what I intended. Things got out of hand. Decisions were made that I wasn't entirely comfortable with, and I should have spoken up. I should have advocated for your inclusion, and I didn't, and I'm genuinely sorry. I stood in my garden with the phone against my ear and listened to the architecture of her apology. It was a skilled piece of construction. Passive voice throughout. Decisions were made, not I made decisions. Positioning herself as a bystander who could have intervened, rather than a participant who had tried to transfer my contracts to her own name. Warm tone. The word genuinely. I appreciate you calling, I said. Dee said. I want to be honest with you. A small pause. The pause of someone transitioning from the prepared remarks to the actual purpose of the call. Our family is going through a difficult time. Bryce is in the process of transitioning careers, which has created some financial pressure. I know Dominique has been reaching out to you. She has. I think they both would benefit enormously from a fresh start. A new city, maybe. Bryce has contacts in Atlanta who've expressed interest. But the move, the deposit on a new apartment, getting settled while he pursues these opportunities. Another pause. If you were in a position to help them bridge this period, Hannah, I think it would make such a difference. We're talking about your daughter's stability, her future. And there it was. I had counted, out of a mild, detached curiosity, 17 sentences from hello to the ask. 17 sentences of warmth and manufactured contrition, all in service of the 18th sentence, which was, give us money. How much are you asking for, Carolyn? A slight catch. She hadn't expected me to be so direct. Whatever you feel comfortable with. 25,000 would allow them to... No, I said. Silence. I understand this is a difficult... Carolyn. My voice was pleasant, even. The voice I used with parents who were trying to negotiate their way around a report card. I want to make sure we understand each other. You tried to transfer my contracts to your name before the wedding, so I would have no legal standing over an event I paid for in full. You helped construct a narrative about my mental health to distribute among your son's professional contacts. And you helped facilitate the exclusion of a 68-year-old woman from her only daughter's wedding. The silence on the other end was the silence of someone who had not expected to be named so precisely. And now you're calling to apologize, I continued, and asking for $25,000. Hannah, I want you to hear something. Are you listening? A very small yes. I am not a resource. I am not a line item in someone's financial planning. I am Dominique's mother, and any future relationship between me and my daughter will be built on honesty and respect, not on the terms your family has been operating on. I ended the call. I stood in the garden for a while after, between the rose bushes and the early winter kale, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Clean. That evening, I called Sandra Okafor and told her to finalize the updated estate documents we had been preparing. New trust structure. Adjusted beneficiary arrangements. Not punitive, I was not trying to punish Dominique, but clear, structured around my terms, not around an assumption that my love was unconditional in the financial sense, as well as the emotional one. Love is not a blank check. I had learned that too late, but I had learned it. Dominique arrived at my door on a Saturday afternoon in November, 6 weeks after the wedding. She did not look like the woman who had stood in that hallway at Belmont Estate in her beaded gown, composed and certain. She looked like someone who had been through something that had taken the surface off of things and left the underneath exposed. Her eyes were tired. She was wearing a coat I recognized. She'd had it since graduate school, plain navy wool, the kind of thing she'd have considered too ordinary in recent years. I let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had done her homework for 12 years, where I had packed her school lunches and signed her permission slips and helped her study for the SAT on 3 consecutive February weekends. And she looked at me with the expression of a woman who has arrived somewhere she should have arrived much sooner. "Bryce is gone," she said. I had heard this through Renee, who had heard it through someone at her university who knew someone in D.C., but I let Dominique tell me herself. "He left 2 weeks ago, took what he needed, cleaned out our joint account." She said it flatly, the way you state facts that have already moved past the point of being shocking. "He's in Charlotte. Apparently there was someone there." I kept my face still. "I'm sorry," I said. And I was. Not for Bryce's absence. I was not sorry for that. But for my daughter, sitting across from me with her graduate school coat on, learning the full shape of what she had chosen. "Mom, I need to show you something." She took out her phone, opened a screenshot, a long exchange of text messages, small type, the timestamp going back 8 months. "I found this on his laptop," she said. "He had it open when he left. I don't know if he left it deliberately or if he just didn't care anymore." She slid the phone across the table toward me. I picked it up. It was a conversation between Bryce and Carolyn. 8 months of messages, running from February through the week before the wedding. I read slowly, carefully. The early messages were logistical, Bryce explaining to his mother the scope of what Hannah had agreed to pay for, Carolyn responding with approvals and suggestions for upgrades. "Tell her we need the full bar package. She'll agree." 3 weeks later, "Has she asked about the guest list yet?" Keep deflecting. A month after that, "The photographer she suggested is too downtown. Tell Dom it doesn't fit the aesthetic." Then in June, Carolyn, "We need to start thinking about how to handle her presence at the event itself." Bryce, "I've been thinking about that. If she's there, she'll expect to be treated like family. His guests won't understand the setup." Carolyn, "Exactly. And if anything goes wrong on the day, if she causes any kind of scene." Bryce, "She won't cause a scene. She's not that kind of woman. But she'll make it about her. She'll cry. She'll want photos. She'll want to make speeches." Carolyn, "So we need a reason to exclude her that sounds reasonable. Something that puts the decision on the family rather than on us." Bryce, "I've been working on that. I've mentioned to a few people that she's been dealing with some health issues. Mental health. Nothing specific. Just enough that if she does show up and seems upset, people will have context." I set the phone down. I looked at my daughter. Dominique was watching me read with the expression of someone who has already read the thing themselves and cannot fully absorb what it means. "He planned it," she said. "From the beginning. I knew he'd lost his job. He told me in March. But I didn't know. Mom, I didn't know he was managing me the same way he was managing you. I thought he was stressed. I thought the decisions about the wedding were about his family's expectations. I thought," her voice broke just at the edge, "I thought he loved me." "Dom, I knew some things," she said. "I knew the guest list had changed. I knew you weren't on it. I told myself it was temporary, that we'd explain later, that after the wedding things would settle down and I'd fix it with you." She looked at her hands. "I let him tell me what to do because I was afraid that if I pushed back, he'd leave." "And he left anyway." "Yes." A long exhale. "He left anyway." I sat across from my daughter in the kitchen where she had grown up, and I looked at her. Really looked. the way a mother looks when she is setting aside the years of distance and disappointment and trying to see the person in front of her without the weight of everything that came before. She was not the villain of this story. That did not make her innocent. She had known enough. She had chosen enough. She had stood in that hallway and spoken those words and meant them, at least in that moment, because she had decided that Bryce's world was worth more than her mother's presence in it. But she had also been deceived, managed, used, and now she was sitting in my kitchen in her graduate school coat with 8 months of chat logs on her phone, and she was 20 years past the last time she'd let me hold her, and she was my daughter. "Dominique," I said. She looked up. "I cannot pretend the last 8 months didn't happen. I cannot go back to the way things were. The way things were wasn't healthy for either of us, and I think some part of you knows that." She nodded, barely. "But I also cannot sit here and tell you that you are nothing to me. That would be a lie." I paused. "What I can tell you is that if we're going to rebuild something, it starts with truth. Complete truth. No management, no strategy, no performance. Do you understand what I mean?" "Yes," she whispered. "Good." I stood up. "Then let's start by making some coffee, and you can tell me everything. Not the version you prepared, not the version that protects Bryce or his family. Everything. And we'll figure out from there what comes next." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay, Mom," and it was the most honest thing she had said to me in years. We sat at that kitchen table for 4 hours. Dominique told me everything, the full timeline of Bryce's job loss, the credit cards he had opened in his name alone, the loan from an associate of his father's that was now 3 months past due, the texts from his former colleagues that she had found months ago and convinced herself to disbelieve. The way he had explained away each problem with the next prospect, the next connection, the next thing that was going to turn it around. The way she had let him, because she was 34 years old and had worked so hard to build a particular image of her life and the alternative, admitting that the man she'd chosen was not who she'd believed him to be, felt like a failure she couldn't absorb on top of everything else. "I've been performing success for so long," she said, somewhere in the second hour, "that I forgot to actually have any. I thought about what Yvette had said to me, about the guilt I had been feeling automatically, reflexively, even when it didn't belong to me. I thought about how easily we learn to perform the lives we think we're supposed to have, and how much energy that performance consumes, and how little is left for the actual living." "You got that from me," I said. "That tendency." She looked surprised. "I spent 35 years being the perfect teacher, the reliable one, the one who never complained, who stayed late and answered every parent's call and absorbed every administrative directive without pushback." I turned my coffee mug in my hands. I performed competence so thoroughly that I lost track of what I actually wanted. And when I brought that home, that same dynamic of giving everything and asking for nothing, I taught you that love looked like that, like someone who was always available and never demanded anything in return. "Mom, that's not your fault. I'm not saying it's my fault, I'm saying it's a pattern. And patterns pass down unless someone breaks them." I looked at her. "We are going to break this one. You and me. Not today, not by the end of this conversation, but we're going to break it." The kitchen was quiet except for the radiator ticking and the sound of the neighborhood going about its afternoon. Someone's dog barking 2 houses down. The particular low hum of a city that does not stop moving simply because your private world has been reorganized. This was the truest moment we had shared in years. Not warm exactly. Not the easy closeness of mothers and daughters in movies, but real, present. 2 people in the same room, seen fully by each other, without the management and performance and strategic silence that had defined the last several years of our relationship. It was a beginning, not an ending, not a resolution. A beginning. And at 68 years old, after a year that had taken more from me than I had known I had left to give, a beginning was the most valuable thing in the world. It was a Tuesday in December, 3 weeks before Christmas, and I was cleaning out the hall closet. This had been on my list since September. The hall closet was the family archive in the way that hall closets become, stuffed with the things too important to throw away and too complicated to actually look at. Dominique's childhood artwork, organized in folders by year. Photographs from the 1990s in those thick paper envelopes from the pharmacy. Walter's work commendations from the city, rolled into a tube he'd never bothered to frame. And at the very back, on the highest shelf, a tin that had once held Danish butter cookies and now held the papers Walter had given me in the last week before he died. For after, he had said. When you're ready. I had never been ready. For 3 years, the tin had sat on that shelf. I had moved it twice, dusted around it, occasionally looked at it directly, and then looked away. There had always been a reason it wasn't the right moment. Too raw. Too soon. Too much else to handle. And then, as the years passed, the tin had become more like a monument than an object. Something you worked around rather than opened. I took it down. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the room that used to be Dominique's, painted now in the quiet blue I'd chosen for myself, and I held the tin in my lap for a while. Then I opened it. There were practical papers, the final insurance documents, a list of passwords in Walter's precise handwriting, instructions about the car's maintenance schedule that I had followed without knowing they were instructions from him, and at the bottom, in a sealed envelope with no label, a letter, his handwriting on the outside. Just my name, Hannah. I opened it. The paper was pale blue, the kind he used for letters. He had always written letters, even when everyone else had moved to email, the way certain men of his generation maintained practices because they believed some things deserved the weight of paper. Hannah, I'm writing this on a Thursday while you're at the hospital getting my prescription refilled. I wanted to write it while you weren't here because I know if you were here I would get distracted looking at you and forget to say the things that matter. First, 41 years. Can you believe that? I still can't. I still sometimes look at you across a room and think, that woman chose me. Out of everyone. And I am still not entirely sure I deserved it. But I have spent 41 years trying to. Second, the coffee. I know about the coffee. I know you make 2 cups. Please don't stop on my account. I like the idea of still being in the kitchen with you in the morning. Third, and this is the thing I most need to say, you are going to be fine. I know you don't believe that right now, and I know that after I'm gone there will be a long period where you won't believe it. But I need you to hear it from me while I still have the words to say it. You are the strongest person I have ever known. Not the loudest, not the most certain. The strongest. There's a difference. The strongest people are the ones who keep showing up even when they're afraid, who keep loving even when they've been hurt, who keep building even when the thing they built keeps getting knocked down. That's you, Hannah. That has always been you. I need to say one more thing, and I hope you'll forgive me for it. Watch out for yourself with Dominique. I love our daughter. You know I do. But I have watched, for the last several years, the way she takes from you without always knowing she's taking. And I have watched you let her, without always knowing you're letting her. This is not a criticism of either of you. It is just a thing I have seen, and because I won't be there to say it out loud, I'm writing it down. You deserve to be loved the way you love. Fully, specifically, without conditions. Don't settle for less than that. Not from her, not from anyone. If you are reading this and things have gotten hard, and I think they might, I want you to remember something. A woman who taught 400 children to read, who stood at the front of a classroom for 35 years and gave everything she had, who was the most generous person in every room she ever walked into, that woman does not need to justify her presence anywhere. Not anywhere. I love you. Go live. Walter. T. I sat on the edge of the guest bed in the December light, and I read the letter twice. Then I sat with it for a long time without reading it, just holding the paper in my hands, feeling the weight of it, which was not the weight of paper at all, but the weight of being known. The particular relief of being seen by someone who saw you clearly and loved you anyway, who loved you because of the clarity, not in spite of it. A woman who taught 400 children to read does not need to justify her presence anywhere. I thought about the hallway at Belmont Estate, the side exit I was meant to use, the guests I wasn't supposed to disturb. I thought about Gerald Patterson's face at the post office, and the phrase, mental health difficulties, and the single transposed letter in an email address. I thought about Carolyn Whitfield's warm, practiced voice asking for $25,000. I thought about my daughter in her graduate school coat at my kitchen table, telling me the truth at last. And I thought about myself, 68 years old, sitting in a guest room in December with my husband's handwriting in my hands, finally reading a letter that had been waiting 3 years for me to be ready. I was ready. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. not in the tin. I moved it to my nightstand where I could reach it, where it could stay. Then I did something I had not done since I was a young woman. I laughed, alone in a quiet room on a Tuesday afternoon, for no reason except that I was alive and the light was good, and somewhere outside a dog was barking, and the world was continuing in its ordinary, indifferent, beautiful way, and Walter had told me to go live, and I intended to do exactly that. Spring came to the yellow house on Edison Street in the way it always had. Slowly at first, then all at once. Crocuses pushing up between the paving stones before anything else had committed to the season. I had started a kitchen garden. Not the ornamental border Walter and I had maintained, but a proper working garden. Tomatoes, peppers, 3 kinds of beans, herbs along the south-facing fence. My neighbor Mrs. Adkins from down the block had been growing vegetables for 30 years and was teaching me what she knew, which was considerable. We spent Saturday mornings in the garden, and she told me about seed varieties with the kind of passionate specificity I had once reserved for reading curricula. I took notes. Dot came for dinner every other Thursday. We had started a 2-person book club, which was really just an excuse to read the novels we'd always said we'd get to, and then talk about them for 3 hours over good food and bad wine. We were 3 books in, and already disagreeing productively about all of them. I had seen Dr. Yvette Holloway every 2 weeks since November. We had moved from crisis processing to something that felt more like excavation, digging carefully through the sediment of a life to find the things worth keeping and the things that needed to be released. It was the most interesting work I had done in years. Dominique called every Sunday. Not every Sunday was easy. Some calls were short, functional, stilted in the way of people who are still learning a new language of relating to each other. Some calls were better. Moments of genuine warmth that felt like glimpses of something we were slowly building toward. She had a new job now, a smaller marketing firm where she seemed to be finding her footing on terms that were her own. She had a small apartment in a different neighborhood than the DuPont Circle life she'd shared with Bryce. And when I visited in February, she had furnished it herself, from thrift stores and a few good pieces she'd found on sale. And it looked like her. Actually her, not the performance of her. We were figuring it out. Not quickly. Not perfectly, but honestly, which was the only way I was willing to do it anymore. Bryce Whitfield had been formally charged in March. 2 counts related to the financial irregularities at Morrison and Webb, the case that had been building since before his termination. Carolyn and James Whitfield had listed the McLean house, the one Dominique had described to me as the family estate. The image had finally cost more than it was worth to maintain. I did not gloat about this. There was a woman in that family, Carolyn Whitfield, who had made choices I could not excuse, but she was also a mother, watching the structure of her life come apart, and I knew something about that. I kept my thoughts about the Whitfields to myself, which was the most charitable thing I could do. One afternoon in late April, I was transplanting seedlings when Dominique called. "Mom? Hey, baby." I had started saying that again, somewhere in the last few months. Baby. I had stopped for a while, in the early days of the rebuilding, when every word between us was careful and measured. But it had come back. It came back the way things come back when you stop forcing them. I was wondering, is it okay if I come this weekend? I want to help in the garden. I looked at my hands, dirt up to the wrists, the seedlings waiting in their starter pots. Do you know anything about gardening? A pause. No. Perfect, I said. Neither did I 6 months ago. Come Saturday morning. Bring clothes you can get dirty. She laughed. It sounded like her, like the person she was becoming on the other side of everything we had been through. Okay, she said. Saturday. I hung up and went back to my seedlings. There was a box on the porch table that I had brought out with me earlier that morning, a small velvet pouch inside it. The pearl necklace. 3 strands, freshwater pearls, gold and garnet clasp, made in 1962. Worn by Mama Louise at her wedding, worn by me at mine, kept in a cedar box for 30 years. I had not given it to Dominique that morning at Belmont Estate. I had set it on the hallway table and walked away, and when I came back for it 2 days later, I don't know why I did, only that I needed to. Amber, the venue coordinator, had kept it safe behind the front desk, waiting. It was not the right time to give it yet. I knew that, but I kept it on the porch table that afternoon, in the spring light, where I could see it while I worked. As a reminder that some things belong to the right moment, that the right moment, if you stop trying to force it, has a way of finding you. The sun was warm on my back. The seedlings were going into good soil. Down the block, Mrs. Adkins was calling something to her grandchildren in the yard. I was 68 years old. I had buried my husband and been betrayed by my daughter and spent $47,000 on a wedding I was not allowed to attend. I had sat in a therapist's office and cried for the first time in months and felt the particular relief of being told that I was not, had never been, the problem. I had read a letter that had been waiting for me for 3 years and finally heard what it said. I had, at 68, begun. Some people will read this story and want to know if I forgave her. If Dominique and I are close now the way we used to be, if everything is fixed, the honest answer is, we are building something. Slowly, without the false certainty that love alone is enough to sustain a relationship that hasn't done the work of being honest. Some weeks we are closer than others. Some calls are easy and some are careful. She is trying. I am trying. That is the most truthful thing I can say about it. What I can say with certainty is this. I no longer make myself small to fit into spaces that were not designed to hold me. I no longer mistake my willingness to be diminished for generosity. I no longer pour the second cup of coffee out of habit without being grateful for the habit, because it keeps him in the kitchen with me, the way he asked, and I have decided that is not grief. That is love. That is the difference. I put the last seedling into the ground, sat back on my heels, and looked at what I was making. Row by row, root by root, in good soil, starting as the best things do from nothing visible, with the whole of spring still ahead. They thought showing me the side exit was the same as making me disappear. What they forgot is that a woman who taught 400 children to read, who loved one man for 41 years, who built a life from 35 years of showing up, she doesn't disappear. She just decides, finally, to take up exactly the space she was always owed.